Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's Tim Leonard-Tovich here. Welcome very much to the webinar. We've just put the lines on mute just to minimize any background disruption, and there will be an opportunity for questions, and we will open the line up at that time. So I'm just going to give it one more minute to allow people to log on, and then we're going to get started. Well, good evening, everyone. It's Tim Leonard-Tovich here. I'm the Director of Nursing and Health Policy with the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, RNAO, and it's a distinct pleasure to welcome you all to the third in a series of webinars aimed at welcoming Syrian refugees to Ontario. We're very privileged to be joined this evening by two guests. We have Captain Tyler McNaughton, who is with the High Readiness Detachment of the Canadian Armed Forces. He's a nursing officer, and he's going to provide a presentation this evening. As well, we also have Tom Appleyard, who's the Acting Manager of Training, Exercises, and Awareness with the Emergency Management Branch of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. So we're very pleased to have our guests joining us. And I'm going to begin with some opening remarks. I just want to orient everyone to the WebEx platform that you should all be hopefully signed into now. You do have an option on there to see our slides. In addition, you also have the ability to pose a question directly through the webinar client there. And so we encourage you to take advantage of that. Also, there will come a time later in the webinar where we will open up the lines if you want to state your question over the phone. And I should also note as well that this webinar is being recorded, and the purpose for that is that we can share it with our colleagues who were unable to join us this evening, and we do archive them on RNAO's website, rnao.ca, so feel free to share that with anyone you know who may have been interested but was unable to attend today. So Josephine, can we advance the slide? So I'm going to, because we have two very, very good guest speakers here this evening, I'm going to go relatively quickly through my remarks, but I just want to say that as the professional association for registered nurses, nurse practitioners, and nursing students, supporting and welcoming refugees has been one of our one of many priorities for our association, and it does directly align with our ends or our strategic objectives, particularly looking at influencing healthy public policies, speaking out on emerging issues, as well as advancing the role and image of nurses. And so some of our experience to date in terms of supporting refugees include when the previous federal government made cuts to the interim federal health program, RNAO was one of the vocal opponents, joining strong support for reinstating those cuts that were made. And in fact, we actually took this to court, and RNAO, in collaboration with the Community Association of Community Health Centres of Canada, were granted intervenor status at the Federal Court of Appeal when we were challenging these cuts. With the change in federal government, we did not have to go to court as they restored and, in fact, expanded the interim federal health program, so we did not have to exercise that. However, I think it just goes to show there's a very strong interest within this issue among nurses. As well, we've been actively engaged in supporting the integration most recently of Syrian refugees. And just from the attendance this evening and the number who have registered and those who are online right now, I think is a really strong testament to the interest in this issue. And also, we recognize that registered nurses, nurse practitioners, and nursing students are very much actively involved in the provision of care delivery to refugees. In fact, it's nurses often who are at the forefront of supporting and welcoming refugees within the health system, and of course in collaboration with an interprofessional team. Josephine? So some of the ways in which we've been involved thus far, we've had the privilege of issuing a joint media statement with the Ontario Medical Association, talking about doctors and nurses are prepared and ready to welcome refugees. We've been involved with speaking to the media, very active in social media. We put a call out to our members seeking those who are interested in volunteering, and had a very, very tremendous response. Volunteering both in terms of getting involved with these webinars, but then also we had some specific requests from providers, organizations that were seeking particular expertise, and we were able to provide that linkage. I myself can't profess to be an expert in refugee care, but we do have a membership who has expertise in that. We really see our role as bringing people together, convening the discussions, and really serving as a platform for that exchange of knowledge. And even though we are very fortunate to have two excellent presenters here tonight, also we welcome your comments and feedback and any expertise that you want to share during the Q&A period. And I also really want to give a shout out and to commend the many nurses and other healthcare professionals who are working right now, whether it be within community health centers, hospitals, public health units, providing services at interim refugee housing, and the list goes on and on. You're doing tremendous work and making very valuable contributions, so thank you for that. Josephine? And if you want to continue. We've also been very fortunate to be engaged with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. The Ministry has been very proactive in engaging with the field, with stakeholders, and so we do sit on a number of tables, one in which is focused on looking at provider education, and we also sit on a broader working group supporting the integration of Syrian refugees. And some of you may have seen the cover feature in the most, I guess it's not the most recent registered nurse journal anymore, is it, Josephine? Or our media past one, and within that we actually did have Captain McNaughton was featured within that. I encourage all of you, if you haven't had a chance, to take a look at that feature when you have a moment. And we're actually going to be hearing from Captain McNaughton this evening. And so this is the third in a series of 4 webinars. The other 2 were very successful, as I know this one will be as well. And our final webinar is going to be taking place on April 21st. It will be hosted by our CEO, Dr. Doris Grinspan. And Doris will, I'm sure, provide a very interesting and enlightening webinar. And I think we're still doing some planning in terms of the specific topic that will focus on that. But feel free to join that one as well, because we try to have a different flavor each time to offer a different perspective, and feel free to share with your colleagues as well. Okay, so now we're going to switch things over, and I really want to move forward with our guests this evening. I'm going to introduce Captain Tyler McNaughton. As I mentioned before, he is a nursing officer with the High Readiness Detachment based out of Ottawa, and he is with the Canadian Armed Forces. Tyler has a first-hand, on-the-ground experience in the screening of Syrian refugees overseas. So for those of you who were at the previous webinar, we were talking about care when refugees arrive in Ontario, and Tyler will be able to offer us the perspective of what went on prior to refugees coming to Canada. And I think that I stand joined by others, Tyler, in welcoming you and thanking you very much for the important work that you're doing and have done. So, Tyler, over to you, and if you could just let us know when you're ready to advance your slide, and we will do that.
Sure. So, Tim's already introduced me. I won't do that again. I deployed as part of Operation Provision Task Force Jordan to Amman, Jordan from the 10th of December until the 16th of January. The photo you see there is the majority of our health services team, but we did have other personnel acting in the background to support us. That includes all our military personnel as well as the local translators that we had. Slide. So just a quick outline of what I'll be covering. I won't go over it. I'll see it there, so slide please. A little background on the Civil War. In March of 2011, the protests, as we all know, began as part of the Arab Spring. The Syrian government used violence to suppress the demonstrations in their country. As a result, militias began to form to fight back against that government repression. In 2012, the International Committee of the Red Cross declared the conflict a civil war, and that's part of the international humanitarian law. So what that does is it grants all parties in a conflict the right to use appropriate force to achieve their aims. In other words, those militias were no longer illegal bodies, they were legitimate parties to a conflict. This designation can also form the basis for war crimes prosecutions in the future. In 2013, we heard a couple reports of suspected chemical weapons being used. The UN investigated this and declared that chemical weapons were used, but didn't assign blame to one group or another. Through negotiations with the Syrian government, they eventually agreed to the removal of all of their chemical weapons, and this was completed by June of 2014. In mid-2014, ISIS also began to appear, and obviously this compounded the existing humanitarian crisis. At that time, the U.S. and 5 Arab countries began airstrikes against ISIS, starting in September of 2014. So to date, there's a current total of 4,812,204 Syrian refugees registered with the UNHCR, and that source is the UNHCR and the government of Turkey. Those numbers are from 16 March of this year, so that's fairly to date. The largest concentration of these refugees are found in Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt, in that order. Slide, please. So this is just a quick overview map of the area. The two highlighted areas at the bottom of Syria are those that are most concerning for the Jordanian government, as a lot of the fighting was occurring there and was forcing the refugees over their border. Jordan itself is governed as a constitutional monarchy. They have a king. Their total area is a little over 89,000 square kilometers. So to put that in perspective, it's about a 12th the size of Ontario. However, their population is close to 9.5 million. For demographics, they're about 97% Muslim, 2% Christian, and 1% others. Slide. So, an important point to note about Jordan is they're not a signatory to the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. So even though they're not a signatory, they actually do recognize the migrants coming over the border as refugees, and the protections afforded to them are generally favorable, despite Jordan's own socioeconomic challenges. They have a lot of overcrowding, unemployment, insufficient natural resources. They import a lot of that stuff, a lot of poverty and government debt, but they still take care of the refugees. They provide asylum for a large number of refugees, and those numbers are from June of 2015. They're a little dated, but that's what the best I could find for this presentation. They provide asylum for refugees both from Syria and Iraq, and it has granted Syrian refugees access to services such as health and education in their host communities. This isn't being done in some other countries. Syrian refugee camps of Azraq and Zatari were built on land provided by the authorities where they also ensure security. So I don't know if you can see it in those slides, but approximately in the top left-hand corner, in about an inch or so, is Zatari, and then down southeast from that is Azraq. Of the 2.9 million non-citizens in Jordan, approximately 1.3 million are Syrian, but this number doesn't differentiate between migrants and refugees. There were a lot of migrants before the war that came to live in Jordan and work there. There's also many Palestinians who live in Jordan. Slide. So background on this actual mission that I was on. There were several parties involved, including the UNHCR, which identifies and registers the refugees around the world. The IRCC is the new name for Citizenship and Immigration Canada. They're a Government of Canada agency that facilitates the arrival of immigrants, provides protection to refugees, and offers programming to help newcomers settle in Canada. They were the lead agency for this mission and coordinated the efforts of all the other organizations such as Canadian Armed Forces, RCMP, Health Canada, and others. The International Organization for Migration is a multinational company that works with 162 member states to ensure the orderly and humane management of migration. They promote international cooperation on migration issues, assist in the search for practical solutions to migration problems, and provide humanitarian assistance to migrants in need, including refugees and internally displaced people. So that's from their website. What they did in our circumstance was they were contracted by IRCC to conduct immigration medical exams of the Syrian refugees designated to come to Canada. They included nurses, doctors, and other admin staff from around the world. They were the lead agency for conducting the immigration medical exams and scheduled all the appointments, including the ones for the Canadian Armed Forces. They also provided what we call Role 1 care to clients and non-Canadian Armed Forces staff. What that means is if somebody came in with a cold or a minor ailment, they could see them there and treat it instead of sending them away to be dealt with elsewhere. The Canadian Armed Forces worked parallel to IOM, conducting the IMEs, but we were dependent on IOM for the completion of the pre-exam or administrative section of the exam. They provided us a daily client list of who we were going to be seeing, and they registered all the clients on a daily basis before they got to us. They also provided some admin staff to help augment our screening operation. On the ground was the Jordanian Air Force. We actually used one of their facilities, and they provided us security while we were there. And the location was actually a site called the SOFEX, which stands for Special Operations Forces Exhibition. It's an exhibition that's held every 2 years at the site and gathers special forces from around the world to see the latest and greatest of technology and training and that kind of stuff. Next. So I'm not going to go over the points on the slide here. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. You can read the points yourselves. But the overall question is, why do we screen for health? The reason behind that is based on the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. Its objective is to protect Canadian public health and safety, provide successful integration to immigrants and refugees, and it prevents an excessive demand on health and social services. In the case of refugees, they are exempt from this clause because there is such a risk to them staying in their own country. We don't deny them entry due to potential excessive demand on health and social services. We also are looking at if they pose a danger to public health. So a couple of things that would disqualify them are active tuberculosis, specifically pulmonary, and untreated syphilis. However, these are not absolute disqualifiers. Once they receive some treatment for those two conditions, they can then be allowed to immigrate to Canada. A couple of absolute disqualifiers, though, are any kind of drug addiction with violent behavior or uncontrolled mental health conditions with violent behavior. At the end of the entire process, their file is given a grade, either an A or B. The A means it's been a normal exam, there are no conditions that would impact their immigration, and B means they have some kind of chronic condition potentially requiring follow-up, conditions meeting the public health criteria, or positive syphilis or HIV. Again, this isn't an absolute disqualifier. This means they go for another level of review before their files are actually approved. Slide. This is just a quick graphic of the overall process once the refugees were identified to the Canadian Armed Forces. We conducted the IME, or Immigration Medical Exam, which I'll go over, and then we looked at what their resettlement needs may be. And once they got to Canada, Public Health began their follow-up. Slide. So the IME screening process that we conducted, we used a web-based application called eMedical that was initially designed by the Australians to screen refugees, immigrants, anybody wishing to emigrate to their country. It's now used by Canada and New Zealand as well, as we have similar criteria and questions that we need answered. It's designed for submitting medical reports of immigration examinations, including lab reports and x-rays. And there's several steps through it. So initially, the IOM completes the pre-medical, which includes the declaration and consent to gathering of information and sharing of that with public health agencies. An ID check is done and photo taken to associate with the file, and then a client list is sent to the Canadian Armed Forces from there. On the actual day of the exam, the clients arrive, and IOM checks them into the SOFEX. Lab conducts a urinalysis for ages 5 years and older, and anybody 15 years and older gets a quick HIV and syphilis test. If any of those quick tests come back positive, we take a blood sample and actually send it to a local lab for definitive testing. An x-ray is done for all those 11 years of age and older, and initially we had a local hospital conducting those x-rays and reading them. It wasn't all that efficient, unfortunately, so we actually deployed our own x-ray department and radiologist to Jordan, and they did the x-rays on site and read them there on site. Following that, the clients came to the nurses, or we actually had med tech teams as well. Medical technicians are basically like civilian paramedics with some extra training. The nurses and med techs conducted a medical history with confirmation of the ID, height, weight, blood pressure, and eye exam. And then they were transferred over to the medical officers, who conducted a physical exam, confirming the ID yet again. They graded the files, as I talked about earlier, A or B, identified any resettlement needs that they might require either in transit or on their arrival. So for transit, they might need oxygen, a wheelchair, medical escort, or on arrival, they would need urgent follow-up for chronic conditions or something new that may have been identified by us. And then the final part of the process is admin, and just closing off the file, submitting them, or if they were graded a B, they were sent for further review in London, Ontario. The file management, we initially were a little bit disorganized. We hadn't done this before, but As the military, we try and make things as efficient as possible, and we transitioned to a bit of a team approach where each nurse or medtech team was paired with one medical officer, and we gave those files directly to that individual. What this allowed us to do was it actually increased our collaboration between the staff, and there was some better workload distribution. It also allowed us to conduct some teaching along the way. There were a couple instances where I specifically didn't recognize a couple of conditions that clients presented with, and after the doctor had seen them, we sat down, we discussed some of those signs and symptoms, or if he didn't know what it was either, we looked it up and researched it together. So it was a good symbiotic relationship there. Our goal was approximately 200 to 250 clients screened a day. We were typically around the 200 mark due to some availability of clients. The ultimate goals were 25,000 clients by the end of February, with 6,000 of them being seen in Jordan. We were supposed to be seeing about 900 to 1,000 clients a week between the Canadian Armed Forces and IOM. We actually ended up seeing about 1,800 to 2,000 a week. So we far surpassed what our goals were, and we met those 6,000 by the time we had left. So it was very well. It flowed very well eventually. So next slide, please. This is just a brief overview, a little bit of what our area was like. This was the SOFEX hangar. It was a large aircraft hangar that we were working in. It's located on a joint civilian-military airport right in the middle of Amman, Jordan. The aircraft ramp was located just outside our main entrance, so there were planes out there running up all the time and then taking off, going off down the runway. So it was interesting to see. As I mentioned before, the IRCC was a lead agency and had contracted the site. They conducted security screenings and interviews with the members before they even got to us, and that was usually done on a separate day. So they would come one day for those interviews first. Those files would be screened and decided yes or no, we're going to actually ask them to come to Canada, and then they would come back for a medical screening. What we had was some modular office space that was pre-set up for us, and our setup in each of our nursing rooms included a scale, height chart, eye chart, BP cuff, and a baby scale in a central location that was common to everyone. We also had a work table for a computer station, cart for supplies, and then obviously sufficient chairs for the nurse, translator, and all the family members. The flow usually they came in that main entrance, they got checked in, they sat in that waiting area until they were called either to the x-ray or lab first. They alternated. Once done at one of them, they went to the other. They were brought to our screening area on the far left of the screen, and from there we conducted our screenings, both the nurses and doctors, and they were done for the day afterwards, and they were checked out again on the right-hand side before getting back on their buses and heading home. Slide. So total number of clients we saw was 4,381, including 811 families. That's just seen by the Canadian Armed Forces in that 5-week period that we were there. Our X-ray department deployed about a week and a half after us, and they were set up about 2 weeks afterwards, so they only saw 2017, but that was still a large number for them. The rest of the stats are just approximations. We don't have definitive numbers, but the ratio was approximately 50-50 male, female. There was a huge range of ages. We had children as young as a few days old to seniors in their 80s. There were a lot of children, though, under 18 with their parents. Not a lot of couples without children. Most families had started already. And then there were a few senior citizens that actually traveling on their own. but they usually had family that had been screened separately, and they were eventually going to end up in the same place. It was just that medical screening was conducted separately. The size of the family ranged from 1 to 12 people. Typically, the one person was the senior citizen traveling on their own, but the average was about 6 family members, so 2 parents and 4 kids. But as the 12-person family was obviously 2 parents and 10 kids, so some of the families could be quite large. Slide. These are just some photos of some of the nurses actually doing our job. Some of them were staged, but I mean, you can see we took blood pressure, the height, the weight, and this was on the bottom left was the actual eye exam that we did. Not everyone was literate, so instead of asking them to identify letters that they may not even understand, all they had to do was indicate which way the opening was on that circle. Slide. Some of the health conditions we saw, I won't go through the entire list, but hypertension was a huge one. We frequently saw clients with BPs in the 140s. Many were on BP meds. And occasionally we had clients with BPs over 180, even though they were on BP meds. So lots of uncontrolled hypertension, lots of undiagnosed diabetes as well, which was discovered through our urinalysis that we did on everybody 5 and older. Obviously, their glucose was identified as being high there, and we caught that and flagged them for follow-up once they arrived. Mental health. I saw something recently in, I think it was the CNA journal, where they suggested we not routinely screen for mental health, but it was a big thing that we saw there. Because in the unusual category, since you can see we saw several shrapnel or penetrating issues or injuries. I had one gentleman who had been jailed before the war and was tortured, so he had lasting injuries from that. And then we had the wild and wonderful as well, as you can see from the remainder of the list. Epidermolysis bullosa was an interesting one that I saw. It's a group of rare diseases that causes the skin to blister. Usually shows up in infancy or childhood, and it's most often inherited, but it can be an autoimmune disorder. Unfortunately for the children, there's no cure, but they typically take pain meds or corticosteroids. Antibiotics for infections, mild forms may improve with age, but they may need surgery to correct deformities caused by the scarring or restore mobility. In the autoimmune version, it can be fatal. So this child that I saw, I think he was about 18 months old, and he just had blisters everywhere and flaking skin, and it just did not look comfortable. There was obviously blood on his blanket that he was wrapped in as well, so we really wanted to get him to Canada and get him the follow-up that he needed. Next slide. For cultural considerations, obviously it's a patriarchal Muslim society. Usually we directed our questions towards the head of the family through the through the translator, and he answered on behalf of everyone. However, there was lots of families that bucked the norm, and the mom was the leader and took charge and answered everything we had. So for the hijab or niqab, it actually wasn't a very big deal. Most clients did wear some version of it, but it did not present any kind of barrier to interaction. Most of the women that came in wearing the niqab actually automatically lifted it as soon as they were in that private office with us. And if they didn't, they had no issue doing so when they were asked, as was required to confirm their identity. For gender of the healthcare provider, wasn't a big deal. We usually tried to pair a male provider with a female translator and vice versa. Wasn't always possible, and some women were a little more discreet, so they didn't want a male provider taking a blood pressure or something like that. They came in with several layers, so occasionally I had to step out and ask one of my female colleagues to come in and take a blood pressure, but beyond that, there were no issues there. sensitive questions. They're a very proud society, so asking them if they had HIV, AIDS, or addictions got very offensive to some of them. So what we tried to do is give them a disclaimer at the beginning of our interview to reduce the tension and let them know that we weren't trying to be offensive. What we said was we realize that some questions may cover sensitive topics, but please don't take any offense. All clients are asked the same set of questions just in order to prepare for any medical needs you may have when you arrive in Canada. This actually seemed to work pretty well, and everybody had a bit of a laugh when those questions came around instead. So it was a different work week, as their holy day is Fridays, so typically we worked Saturday to Thursdays. Like other lessons, I think this is a common theme no matter where any kind of group like this goes. We had very capable translators, however, they didn't have a medical background. So they had worked with U.S. combat forces before. They did have good English. They knew how to work with the military, but they didn't have that medical terminology. And one example I have is when asked about if a woman was pregnant, one of the translators would respond and say, no, she's had a tubal ligation. And we asked, are you sure? Tubal ligation? Yep. Turns out it was an IUD. So he didn't understand that difference at that time, but with some education, we got all of them on the same page, and we worked out those issues. In general, they're a very hospitable culture, and it's actually one of their tenets that they're hospitable to others. The hotel staff were very kind and bent over backwards to accommodate us and get us anything we might need. Our translators were great as well. They frequently brought in treats for our staff. The RCMP was there to alleviate some of the concerns towards the end, and they received feedback from a lot of the clients about the appreciation they felt for the services provided by our military members. And even the IOM, one of the doctors on their team, invited our military doctors to her house in Amman after the end of the mission for an appreciation dinner. Next slide. So this is just all 6 of the nurses that deployed on our mission. We're all from across the country. We had Edmonton, Ottawa, Halifax, and Petawawa represented. Slide. And this is just some of our group on one of our days off. We traveled to the ancient city of Petra and climbed all the way up to the top of the mountain. So that's it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Tyler, for a very informative presentation, and for the work that you and your team did. I can certainly say that I've learned a lot from it, and I look forward to the questions from the group. But we're just going to pause and hold those questions for a little bit, because now I want to introduce Tom again. Tom Appleyard is the Acting Manager of Training, Exercises, and Awareness with the Emergency Management Branch of the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. And I've asked Tom to provide us with a bit of a general update, and Tom has also agreed to stick around and help field any questions that may be relevant to his work. So, Tom, over to you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Tim. And I'd like to start with 3 quick thank yous. First, thank you for inviting me to participate in this webinar. That was really very interesting and helpful to hear Tyler's presentation. Want to thank the RNAO so much for all the work that you've done over the past number of months, along with doing your own work, but certainly helping us every step of along the way with the work we've been doing. Tim already mentioned a couple ways in which that's happened, and I'll speak to that a bit more in a moment. And thirdly, want to echo Tim's comments and terms of the ministry thanking all the nurses for all the work you've done in this initiative, whether it's in hospitals or public health or long-term care or whatever sector you're in. We certainly know the quality of the work that is going on. I'm going to speak briefly to three things. Briefly to sort of where are we at in terms of the federal initiative of refugees. Spend most of my brief time talking really about what we did. I'm with the Emergency Management branch, as Tim mentioned, and so much of the work that we've done has been focused in our Emergency Operations Center at the Ministry. And that Emergency Operations Center deactivated a few days ago. The Ministry will certainly continue to work on this issue, but most of what I'll speak to is really what we've been doing over the past number of months, as well as briefly looking ahead in terms of the work that's ahead for us and for the health. And we certainly acknowledge that really the work with Syrian refugees is and the Syrian new Canadians is really just beginning, and we know that nurses are going to play a big role in the months and years ahead on that. So in terms of where we're at with the new Canadians, approximately 26,000 have arrived as of March 8th, so exceeding that federal commitment of 25,000. That included nearly 15,000 government-assisted refugees, and about 42% of those have settled in Ontario and are now Ontario residents, as well as Canadian citizens. They came over to us in 99 chartered flights. About 56 landed in Toronto. And many of those folks obviously moving on to other provinces, as well as those who have stayed in Ontario. So to focus for a few minutes on some of the things that we did at the Ministry, and in doing so, I want to highlight some resources that are available to all of you. So between mid-December and the beginning of March, as the new Canadians were arriving, we activated that Emergency Operations Center, and a number of key activities were the development of the Ontario Health System Action Plan for Syrian refugees, really to provide guidance to the health system in supporting both the arrival and now integration of Syrian refugees in Ontario. And again, here's where I want to really thank Tim and the colleagues at the RNAO. I'm pretty sure that the request for review was a bit of an overnight job, and Tim was probably up late into the night reviewing that plan, making sure that it was as good as it could be. That resource, that action plan, is a current plan. It's active now. If you want to find it on the Ministry website, little tip, it's very difficult to navigate the Ministry website. Probably the best way to find that plan is simply to Google that phrase, Ontario Health System Action Plan, Syrian refugees. Other things that our Emergency Operations Center did, the development of early assessment considerations for primary care providers tool to support primary care providers in early assessments and care of Syrian refugees, covering all ages. And again, shout out to the RNAO for your support in not only identifying that as a need, but helping us to put that together. The website I mentioned is still being maintained, along with a number of resources that I will continue to identify here. Also, you'll find helpful resources from other partners there. So we continue to coordinate with partners on teleconferences to support the response and address issues identified in the field. We have regular teleconferences with public health units, local health integration networks, as well as various provincial groups. And finally, regular situation awareness to the health system in terms of this initiative and issues that are coming up that we do through daily situation reports. No longer doing those daily, but continue to maintain that situation awareness. So I mentioned the action plan that is available online in both English and French. The objectives of that plan were to help the health system understand refugees' health status and assess needs, to prepare the health system to support those refugee health needs by providing information, coordination, and outreach, and finally responding to refugees' health needs upon arrival in the settings and communities that they live in. There were 8 annexes which identified particular guidance, areas of particular guidance. One was work that was done around the airport. I'll speak to exactly what our role was there momentarily. Some specific information with respect to the somewhat complicated world of health insurance for new Canadians. Some public health specific annexes in terms of surveillance, case and contact management. An annex around interim lodging sites, and to be clear, at this point, the federal government has identified that interim lodging sites are not needed. The short-term residences in the RAP centers, the Refugee Assistance Program, Resettlement Assistance Program centers, certainly are being used. But the interim lodging site model is not. So that annex, that part of the plan was never activated. Immunization, local health system coordination, as well as infection prevention control and worker health and safety. A number of other fact sheets that we've made available. Again, these are all online. The first being one for new Canadians and their sponsors, really about healthcare options available to them. One which spoke to the Refugee Health Line. I'll speak to that in more detail momentarily. I expect many of you are aware of the Health Line. There is a fact sheet available about that. A fact sheet with some useful contact information. The one I already mentioned really focused on primary care and some considerations in terms of assessment and care in primary care. And one more fact sheet that's not listed here, not yet available online, will be soon, which we have distributed to partners around dental benefits. And again, the somewhat complicated world of dental benefits for new Canadians. So I mentioned there was some activity at the airport. The arrival at the Toronto airport, because of concern of the possibility of creating a surge on local hospitals around the airport, the ministry deployed the Emergency Medical Assistance Team, which some of you may know as our sort of mobile field hospital. They were actually on site at the airport from December 15th. Of 2015 until a couple weeks ago, March 1st, to support those non-emergency medical needs as people arrived off chartered flights. 30 patients were transported to hospital following an assessment by EMAT, and the assessment was that this supported about 121 fewer hospital visits being needed. So some great work done by the Emergency Medical Assistance Team there. A big part of the plan has obviously been the local health system coordination, making sure that in the communities where people are either temporarily or permanently, that those connections to quality care are being made. There was a big role for local health integration networks in coordinating that local response, as well as other health partners playing a really key role, whether that was in the area around the airports, supporting the work around the RAP centers or other areas where people were settling, as well as that preparation work for the possibility of interim lodging sites, which ended up not being needed. In terms of that primary care considerations, mentioned that the ministry with partners developed that fact sheet. Obviously, upon arrival, transitional care was and is needed, and initial medical assessments and or referral to other health services. Primary care providers obviously played a key role as that initial point of contact into the health system, and continue to play a key role in terms of planning and a way to make sure that that new Canadians can access the required health services. Great, thanks. If you pay attention to only one slide in my brief presentation, I hope this is the one. If you're not aware of this health line, we think it's a really terrific initiative. We set up a new refugee health line to connect new Canadians with health providers by developing and maintaining a registry of volunteer providers able to accommodate refugee patients, a sort of a matching service. So both providers can call to add their name, practice location, the service that they can offer, and the number of patients that they can accept and work with. As well, refugees and sponsors can call to find a provider in their local area. Over 300 healthcare providers, and that's actually a mix of both group and individual practices, have registered so far from over 65 communities to provide that service to new Canadians. Want to stress also that this service is not limited to just Syrian refugees, but to refugees in general, as a way to support those matches being made. And more information is available on that fact sheet. What we are seeing more recently is a big uptick as people are moving out of the temporary accommodation of the RAP centers and are settling into communities. That's really when people are using this service. So we're just now really starting to see a terrific uptick in the matches that are being made. So anticipate that line will continue to be run for some time. In terms of education and awareness, this was an important piece of our work in the Emergency Operations Center. A number of resources that are available on the education and awareness webpage that I mentioned, along with the focus on primary care and the tool that is available there. Also want to stress that we know there's been a lot of activity, like this webinar, that the ministry has only been tangentially involved with or not involved with at all. That we know that lots of health system partners have developed and promoted really terrific education and awareness opportunities. Looking ahead then, so some of you may have tuned in on March 8th, the federal minister made an updated announcement around both immigration and refugee policy, looking forward to between 280,000 and 305,000 new permanent residents for Canada from a variety of regions by the end of 2016. That's beyond refugees, those numbers, but it includes 59,400 protected persons, which includes refugees and others admitted for humanitarian reasons. The slide here breaks down some of the numbers around various types of refugees. Highlights from that plan are available online, and the ministry is now preparing an update to the Health Action Plan, really to look at how the health system will continue to work with the Syrian new Canadians who have already arrived and their integration, as well as to meet the needs of others who are to arrive in 2016 based on that federal announcement. So I'll stop there and pass it back over to Tim.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Tom, for a very informative presentation into the excellent work that the ministry is doing in response to this. And I think it certainly not only helps in the immediate short term, but will help to provide a framework for future work going forward. So I really appreciate the presentation. So I just noticed we have about 6 minutes left, and we do need to vacate our room promptly at 6:30. So Josephine, why don't we start with some questions?
Sure. So the first submission I received, I believe, is directed to Tyler. I've displayed it on the screen, and I'll also read it on the line. This participant says, I was deployed to Azraq refugee camp in 2013 to set up a field hospital, and again in 2014 to work in the hospital that had been updated to a solid structure. I was part of a team from Canadian Red Cross. Tyler, did you get to the camp and have a chance to visit the hospital there? Did you interact with the staff there? Were they part of the process at all?
Unfortunately, no. We were mostly restricted to Amman. One of our doctors may have been up there to see the conditions. I know the Immigration Minister, John McCallum, I believe it is, did go up to one of the camps, but we were focused solely on screening, so we did see people from Saturday to Thursday, and that was our focus.
Great, thank you.
Our next question, I'm involved in looking after the health care of 3 privately sponsored refugee families. My understanding is that under IFHP, they qualify as Type 3 refugees. I have heard conflicting information regarding what is covered for them. Audiology, the first year, dental, limited prescription coverage. Could you please clarify? We are 2 hours out of Toronto in a rural area. We have arranged for all necessary HCP in our area.
I'm wondering, Tom, do you have any guidance around this?
I can take a stab at it. I'm not an expert in this area. I certainly encourage you to please have a look at the annex to the health plan, which I mentioned. There's an annex around insurance. That's a good place to start in terms of what the insurance is. However, I will say that my understanding is that this particular group has access to interim federal health for 12 months, and that does include dental benefits. The fact sheet that was actually just released in the past few days will be on the website in the next couple of days, goes into a bit more detail on the dental benefits. Don't blame you for being confused on it. It is complicated. And that audiology, I must admit, I'm not sure, so I won't speak to that. And that yes, there is limited prescription covered through interim federal health as well.
Thanks, Tom. And for the person who posed that question, if after you've had an opportunity to review the annex that Tom has referred you to and you still have questions, feel free to get in contact with Josephine, and Josephine will send you to the appropriate person within RNAO, and we can look into this further for you. Josephine, the next question?
I haven't received anything further online. Oh, actually, a new question just came in. So, are refugee children enrolled in regular schools or special schools or ESL, English as a second language?
That's a good question. Tom, have you heard anything about?
My understanding, and it's actually not through work so much as the media, is that they're enrolled in all of the above, in regular schools, and some of whom are in ESL programs, and some may be in special education programs based more on their educational needs than their status as new Canadians.
Yeah. And that's consistent with what I've heard, again, just really through learning about experiences through the media. Is there any other questions, Josephine? Okay, so what I'm going to do is we have 2 minutes, so let's open the line and see if there's anyone who has a question that they have been burning to ask on the phone.
The conference has been unmuted. Le mode discrétion a été enlevé de la conférence.
All right, so this is your turn. So does anyone have a question they'd like to raise?
Yes. Have you found that any of the refugees are internationally educated nurses and would like to start the licensure process?
Tyler, in your experience when you were screening any of the refugees, did that stand out to you?
I did actually have one gentleman who was a nurse. I'm not sure what his plan was once he got here, though. He hadn't been practicing for a few years, obviously, as he had left Syria. So I don't even know if he had records of his schooling or if he would be able to attain them. So that would obviously be a challenge once he arrived here. But yes, most of the families we did see were fairly well educated before the war.
Great, thanks, Tyler. So I just am conscious of the time. If anyone else does have some follow-up questions, you can feel free to send them in to us, and I will engage perhaps the assistance of our presenters if it's relevant to their file and see if they're able to answer them for us. Or there may be a question for RNAO, and we'd be happy to answer them as well. So I just want to, again, very much thank both Tom and Captain Tyler McNaught for being with us. And also I want to thank everyone on the line who has joined us. Thank you so much. I hope that you have found this to be useful. I want to extend my gratitude to Josephine, who has coordinated all of this and has played a very important role. And I hope that if you are interested and able, that you will consider attending our next webinar, which will be happening in April, and we will send out a reminder about that. And this webinar will also be archived and available on the RNAO website shortly for anyone who may be interested in viewing it, or a colleague perhaps who was unable to attend today. So that being said, we wish you all a very good evening. Talk soon. Take care.
Thank you, Tim.